Talk is everything. It's every relationship in your life is a sequence of conversations. And if we can do each one of them even a tiny bit better, imagine the accumulated effect that would have on your life, on your relationships, on your work, on the world. This is what we all need to get better at. And it's going to happen in tiny little increments, tiny micro decisions. The decision to make that joke, that decision to ask that great question, the decision to let people have differing views and not get mad at them.
Okay, so joining us now on Open Book is Allison Wood Brooks. She's an associate professor and fellow at the Harvard Business School. It's a place I always wanted to go to, Allison, but I didn't have the balls to apply to it. We'll talk about that in a second.
Love it.
The title of your book is Talk, the Science of Conversation and the Art of Being Ourselves. And if you hear some hoarseness in my voice, I apologize. I'm a little under the weather with these young kids in the middle of the winter. So first of all, let's talk about this, okay? Because I love this book, and I think we have a hard time being ourselves. And I'm very good friends with Robert Greene, who I think you may know from the 48 Laws of Power and from The Art of Seduction and all the different great books that he's written. But he says this to me all the time, that we have good things in us and bad things in us, and we have types of conflict in us, and we have a very hard time articulating it to other people because we don't want to be perceived as bad people.
Yep.
So let's start there. But before we do that, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about your background so we can establish who you are for our viewers and listeners. And then let's talk about why we have such a problem being ourselves.
Yeah. So I'm Allison Wood Brooks. I'm a professor at Harvard Business School. I've been there for 12 or 13 years. No, I look impossibly young. I got my PhD at Wharton, and I'm a behavioral scientist. I created a course. I was recruited to Harvard to teach a course on negotiation, did that for about 4 years, and then created a new course called Talk, which is the basis of this book and has sort of hit a nerve at Harvard and beyond. Before that sort of professional turn in my life, I'm an identical twin, which I think is not just a coincidence that I ended up becoming sort of fascinated and obsessed with conversation and studying humans, because being a twin is a weird and very lucky existence.
Hey everyone, it's Anthony Scaramucci here with some straight talk. Let me tell you, we've got 85% of our viewers who haven't hit the subscribe button yet. What's up with that? It hurts. Listen, I made my career by going all in. Right now, only 15% of our viewers are part of our subscribed family. So please take action. This helps us book more amazing guests. Hit subscribe, join our community, and let's turn these numbers upside down. Now back to the show.
Identical or fraternal or
Identical.
What does your twin do, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, her name's Sarah Carney. She runs a nonprofit called Prime Coalition. They've some professors of my colleagues of mine at the business school have written 2 cases about her, and I didn't even know it. So she's she's a very interesting person. I'm very lucky to know her.
Okay, so I have to ask this: when is your birthday?
March 12th.
Oh, March 12th. You almost okay. So you're a Pisces.
And it's our 40th, Anthony. We're turning 40.
Yeah, I feel bad for you. Okay, at age 61, I feel really bad for you guys. Okay, it's like the funny thing about 40, and I'll just say this to you: when I turned 40, I was like, okay, wow, I think I'm very old. I didn't start getting into the groove until 40. So life begins at 40, Allison. You're going to be just fine.
Thank you. That's very empowering.
So yeah, and you know that already anyway. You're just psychological. Let me tell you the bad part about being 40. I turned 60 last year. I just turned 61 yesterday. I was just getting used to 60.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I was just getting used to 60, and then boom, I'm now 61, right? So before you know it, you're going to be 45, okay? So don't worry, okay?
You're very youthful, Anthony. Very youthful.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work being done, okay? I can give you, if you're nice to me, because one of the problems with me is I don't have a problem being myself, okay? So this is why I want to talk to you about this. I want to understand what this is all about. But if you're nice to me, I'll give you all my health and beauty tips, okay?
Oh, I can't wait. I want them all. Yeah.
You got very good skin from this YouTube video, I can tell, okay?
But not for long. I mean, I'm getting to the age when I'm going to need help soon.
Yeah, I'm not worried about you right now. Tell me about why people can't be themselves. You're hitting a nerve. You said you're hitting a nerve. I know why you're hitting a nerve. Because people can't be themselves. So tell me why.
There's a million reasons that we can't be ourselves, especially in conversation. I mean, when you're talking to somebody else, we're constantly doing a curation task. We're deciding the full contents of our mind is incredibly complex and sophisticated, and there's so much you could possibly say to somebody else. And we're making these little micro decisions of like, well, what tiny fraction of what's in my mind am I going to say out loud to another live human being? And that curation decision is really fraught. I mean, we're making a decision of who am I going to be to you in front of you? I'm doing it right now. I'm like, should I be scientist Allison? Should I be Professor Allison? Should I be basketball player? Should I be mom Allison? And we're constantly toggling and making these micro decisions every time that we speak in a conversation.
Is there a mean Allison in there?
I think there's a mean Allison. She's I think back in middle school and high school, I had more of an open battle with mean Allison, and I hope that nice Allison really won. But I do feel like in my mind, I still, like everyone, have to fight against judgmental reactions to other people's behaviors. But it's become more second nature to not let her out so much.
Right. So you habits. You got to work on these habits.
That's right.
I mean, again, I'm not putting this on you because there's a mean Anthony in there. There's a jealous Anthony in there. There's an envious Anthony. There's a rude Anthony. There's an arrogant Anthony. There's all different types of emotions, but there's certain emotions that we want to project to the world, that we're nice and kind and we're philanthropic. Yeah. We don't want to project those other emotions. And when we get caught doing that, we make ourselves feel bad, don't we?
Yeah, you do. Now, there's a potential for great humor in it, right? Acknowledging that there are all of those versions of you inside and sort of letting them leak out in moments when it seems like you're going to say like, hey, I'm going to tell you something true right now, right? Like, here's something that's living within me. Most people wouldn't let you see this, but I'm going to let you see this little piece of me. There's potential for real connection and humor
Okay,
there.
but when you do that, don't you feel like you're more connected to somebody?
Yeah.
So when you're like more vulnerable with somebody, you're letting them in, and all of a sudden you're able to establish some trust with them, right?
It's so funny. I have a colleague at Harvard. Her name is Leslie John. She studies self-disclosure. She has a book coming out next year called Reveal, and it's very much navigating this spectrum of transparency and sharing and opacity or not sharing. I think about it constantly in terms of like, what do we decide to say, and where there's also magic in keeping things unsaid, right? And knowing that you're so close with somebody that they understand what's happening in your mind, even without you saying it.
Yeah, but you don't want to say stuff because what ends up happening is you don't want to be overly judged either, right? Like if you came from a broken home or you came from a abusive family or whatever it is, you put all that stuff in the closet, right? You want to project something that isn't. So in the conversation that you and I are having, has your mind wandered a little bit? Because in your book, you say that 24% of the conversation time, the mind is moving on or wandering to other things.
My mind has wandered so much. I mean, part of my 40-year-old awakening has been a realization of my intense ADHD. So like all people's minds wander, particularly mine. You have so many books in your background and a little Yoda, and I'm reading that I'm wondering about the car. You also said, yes, we're managing the impression we make on other people. My mind wandered. I've been thinking about Irving Goffman and his theory in the 20th century about impression management and saving face. Like my mind is going all over into the stratosphere all the time. Yes.
If you saw my entire office, you would know that I am a train wreck of a mind. Okay. I am ridiculously disorganized. If I showed you the shit thrown in here, but that car is actually from Superman 1. So I'm a big Superman enthusiast here. You see that?
Is it a baseball glove?
My wife and I are actually in that picture on the bottom there. I had the artist paint it in.
Oh, I love that.
Okay, and so that's Superman and Muhammad Ali fighting. These headsets are from my podcast. Okay, if you look over here, this is look at the mess here.
I love it. There's so much potential for distraction. Has your mind already been wandering? How much has your mind been wandering?
Yeah, no, my mind has totally been wandering because I'm trying to figure you out because you're presenting something, but you are something else too. And so I'm trying to figure it out. Maybe I need to read the book Reveal as well, right? Because a lot going on.
But every person you talk to is so many different people, and everyone has multiple selves. Everyone knows so much, and the only way you're going to figure me out is by asking the questions that you actually want answers to.
But aren't you as a person, this is a more generic question about people, aren't you born a certain way, Allison?
You know what? As a psychologist for a long time, I thought not. I thought everything was learnable and trainable and you could develop better habits. And then I had my own kids, just like you did. And it did change my perspective. They do come out quite different from each other. So I think I've softened my view on what's the balance between nature and nurture. And particularly in the context of conversation, my students ask about this all the time. Aren't there people that are just born good conversationalists? Aren't they just naturally charismatic? Aren't they extroverted? Aren't they gregarious, life of the party? And I think to some extent, they're not born that way. I mean, no one's born knowing how to even have conversation, but some people pick up on the feedback all around them and get better at it faster than others. But we can all get better at it.
What makes somebody charismatic?
Oh my God. All the things in the book, every little thing. Often when we think about people who are charismatic, they're really great listeners and they're really good at calling back to things. They think about other people and they call back to stuff that you've experienced before. They're curious. They want to hear about it. They want to reminisce. They want to make things. They also seek to make things fun. They don't let conversations get boring. That's the L in the talk maxims. The L is levity. So they tend to be really good at levity. They're good at listening. Good at asking questions, good at picking topics that will be interesting to their partners, not just to themselves, and then sensing when the topics start to lose steam and move to something else. You're really good at that. You move topics fast.
Well, because I only got 30 minutes with you. I want to have 5 hours. I want to be like a Joe Rogan conversation with you, but I've only
We
got
need
30
days.
minutes. I only got 30 minutes, so I got to talk fast. I got to think about what I'm saying, right?
Yep, it's exactly right. So,
you know,
but this is something that charismatic people do. They tend to switch topics more quickly until they land on something that's really juicy and really exciting, and then you can kind of stay there for a little bit longer.
Well, I'll tell you a fun, quick story. So Bill Clinton and I have a little bit of a relationship. I invited him to one of my conferences, and he was like, you're good on TV. Do you have a media coach? And I said, no, I don't have a media coach. And he said, hey man, Tiger Woods has a golf coach. You got to have a media coach. And so I said to him, so who's your media coach? And so anyway, he introduced me to his media coach about 12 years ago, and I did a 1-year course in media training.
What did you learn?
I'm going to tell you what I learned. Okay. Shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Okay. Particularly if you're moderating something, shut up and listen. And you'll be more interesting to people if you shut up and listen. And the other thing I learned is talk more slowly. You won't say the word or okay or any of these verbal tics that we have as we're trying to form our thoughts if you just talk more slowly.
But people can put a lot of pressure on themselves to get rid of those verbal tics, which I understand. When my students listen back to their recordings of their conversation, they're mortified by how many disfluencies, stutters are there. Which is true. If you're doing sort of podcasting or one-way speaking, ums and uhs are distracting. In natural dialogue between real people in their lives, those disfluencies serve important purposes. They often signal when someone's...
You're 1,000% right about it. In fact...
It's so important. Like it shows that you're feeling uncertain about something and that your partner should wait for you to sort of clarify.
So much so do I believe that, just going back to the media coaching, I had gotten myself to the point where I said no ums and okays. And the media coach said to me, you sound like a robot.
No one wants to interact with a robot.
You have to feather in some ums and okays.
Yeah, it's exactly right.
People are expecting some ums and okays, but in a public speech, they want less of them. Let's put it that way. But how do you become a better listener? So you've got students. What do you tell your students? How do you become a better listener?
Listen, for decades, people have been talking about active listening, this idea of using nonverbal cues like eye contact, smiling, nodding, leaning forward to show someone that you're hearing them. That's good. That's like listening 101. But to really be a charismatic, responsive, intensive listener, what you really need to do is fight against your mind wandering, which you and I both do intensively. It's part of why I love conversation, is that it's like the challenge of trying to stay engaged. How can I make this interesting for you, but also for myself? So doing that hard work of making it engaging for everyone. But then, and this is what I teach my students, and this is like listening 201, advanced listening, you need to speak your listening out loud. You need to repeat what you've heard someone say. You need to ask follow-up questions. You need to paraphrase what multiple people have said in a group. You need to call back to stuff that you've talked about earlier in the conversation or earlier in your relationship. Those are the only undeniable signals that you've actually heard the other person. Smiling, nodding, leaning forward. You can do those things even if you're thinking about Yoda or your grocery list. You cannot repeat what someone said or ask a follow-up question if you weren't intensively listening to them.
I mean, it's well said. And so since I am listening to you, you're curious about Yoda. So I'll just tell you that my 7-year-old gave me that because it's from The Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Dad, put this in your office. It'll make you smart like Yoda. Okay, so hopefully I'm
Did it
getting
work?
a positive aura. I don't know if it's working or not. Okay. But I hope so. I mean, I hope I'm trying to be smart.
Do you? Let me ask you a question. On any level, do you feel like putting tchotchkes in your office is a great topic seed, so that someone like me will then say, "What's the deal with Yoda?" Yeah.
Yes, but I'm also a child. Okay, I am very in touch with my inner child. Okay, so here, okay, I'm going to show you something. This will end up in the podcast.
Please.
Something I'm very proud of. Can you hold on one second?
Of
Okay,
course.
this is very embarrassing. So, do you recognize that? Okay, and
Is it
for
a
people
hookah?
listening in, do you recognize that? You see, you're too young to recognize.
Oh, I
it.
dream of Jeannie. It's Barbara.
Oh, you are. Yeah,
Oh
okay,
my
see?
God.
Okay, and you see, so Barbara's been on my podcast, and I've had dinner with her in LA several times. And for people listening in, I have the original Genie bottle from I Dream of Jeannie.
What?
There's about 70 of these, and Barbara signed it for me. See, she signed it
That
there.
is gorgeous.
And if you were my vintage, if you were 61 and you were a male,
She's the
heterosexual,
dream.
you had a crush on Barbara Eden. And so my wife, who has no problem with me having dinner with Barbara Eden, okay, I will say that she brings her 91-year-old chaperone, aka her husband, with her. But it is what it is, right? I have to.
How old is Barbara Eden now?
94.
Wow, I bet she's still a babe. Does she have a belly button? Because they never showed her belly button on the show.
She does have a belly button. I haven't seen her belly button, to be honest, but she does have one. But I'm bringing this up because, like, my office is a throwback to my childhood. Because I want to come into my office. I want to think about what I was doing as a kid and what my inner child was.
Does that help you bring yourself to conversations and to your work?
Yeah, I think it's important, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Very much so.
So you mentioned humor a lot in this book.
I do.
Are you a humorous person? I mean, I know the answer, but I want you to articulate it.
Who can say that about themselves? That's crazy.
Of course, you're a humorous person. Okay.
I live as a core family value. I don't think I would have survived my childhood if I didn't learn to keep up with the silly humor in my family.
Okay.
I live for humor. In fact, a huge part of the value add that I hope I bring to the Harvard Business School is like a relentless insistence on levity. I think it might be one of the biggest weaknesses of probably a lot of organizations, but also Harvard is like the only way that you can make great progress and feel connected and alive and safe is if you feel a spirit of play, and that comes largely from humor. If people aren't funny, they can just find it through just like warmth, I think too. But yeah, I live for levity, Anthony.
What's your favorite TV show?
Right now or forever?
No, tell me.
Right now we've been watching Silo, which I will say is in this theme. I also just watched The Diplomat with Kerry Russell. And Silo is Rebecca Ferguson. I'm really liking seeing these protagonist, main character, female characters emerge who are physically tough, super smart. They have skills. They're nuanced. They're interesting. And actually, in both of those shows, they have male partners who are also interesting and high achieving, but aren't the main dish. They're a side dish. So I love watching that.
Okay, I've watched both those shows. I love both those shows. I do a lot of traveling, so I'm always on.
Did you notice that about those shows?
I have noticed that about those shows, but I would say that those shows. Listen, we probably shouldn't get political, but I'm not a very woke person.
It's all right.
What I like about those shows is they're not woke. They show women who are tough and strong, but they're not patronizing these women in these shows. Do you see what
Right.
I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I think that's a very important message. If you're
I like
in
that.
Hollywood listening, you want tough, strong women, and you don't want virtue signaling. You don't want patronization, if that makes any sense. You know,
It does.
And I
It does.
think-
How do you think other shows patronize women? Or what are they
Well,
doing right?
Listen, if you go to Broadway now, they will put the whole spectrum of people on the stage as a virtue signal. There'll be very heavy set people in the dance troupe. There'll be very different types of people. There'll be men and women that shouldn't be there, okay, but they're there. And I think we have a tendency to do this now as a form of virtual signaling as opposed to just talent.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think people be mad at me for saying that, you know, and I think the cancel culture is ebbing now. Finally, I think people are finally saying that's not going to be the thing, you know?
Yep.
So, but
Yep.
hopefully that continues. All right. We got a couple more minutes. Apologies. Let's talk about apologies. Do we apologize to each other too much or too little?
Too little. Too little. There's a lot of discord. There's a lot of
Because,
discord.
people born in the 1940s that are men, they don't apologize.
I know it's a real
that's
problem.
That's a sign of weakness for them to apologize.
I know I think it's a real problem. Until recently, so scientists hadn't studied real conversations between real people until probably the last 5 or 10 years. We've studied public speaking and like pretend interactions for many decades, maybe even centuries. But studying real transcripts between real people and real relationships is a thing that's only possible now at large scale. And one of the things that has jumped out at me and at all scientists is like, we have not studied apology behavior in real conversations. And when you do, and you look at people in real relationships, the people who apologize frequently and well have better relationships. And there's almost no evidence from real conversations that refusing to apologize or neglecting to apologize is ever better than apologizing.
So, have you ever read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Of course. Yes.
Okay. What does he say in that book about apologies?
I don't remember what he says about apology. Does he say anything about apologies?
Yeah. He says that you have to apologize. He says that the minute you apologize, remember, if you read Robert Cialdini's book, The Psychology of Influence. Cialdini, if you read his book, what does he say? He says that there's a common bond that we have in terms of reciprocation. And then the second bond that we have is in our vulnerability. If we can share a piece of ourselves with another person, we can establish trust. And so the combination of those two things create bonds. They create relationships. And so what Dale Carnegie said is that when we offer up an apology and we make an admission that we're actually human and we're wrong about something, it makes us more human and more endearing to the other person, but it also gives the other person an opportunity to do us a mitzvah, which is to forgive us and to move on and also to accept their fallibility in situations. You know,
yeah,
couples that can apologize to each other for various indiscretions are they usually stay together. You know, there's a very funny expression: you can be right or you can be married, Allison. You ever
Yeah,
heard that expression
exactly.
before?
Exactly.
So
Yes.
sometimes you have to eat a little bit of crow in life. Okay, so.
Yes, and apologizing is hard. People don't like to do it because it makes yourself vulnerable to the other person. They don't have to forgive you. But that's not the point of making an apology. The apology is saying, look, I see that you've been harmed or you've been hurt or something as bad has happened, and I'm sorry for that. I don't like that you are hurting. And then they can control how they respond to you, right? You don't have, actually in the book, we talk about the study that found that asking for their forgiveness is not a particularly effective thing to do in the moment. You should really focus on the other person and say, look, I realized that this was hard for you or you're hurting in some way or I harmed you in some way. And for that, I'm sorry. And then let them decide whether they want to forgive you. And it's hard to do. It takes a tremendous amount of strength to make yourself vulnerable in that way to other people and to possibly admit that you did something wrong.
Okay. So this is stuff that is really got a very popular course. It's going to be a best-selling book because
I hope so.
No, it will be. Of course, it will be, okay. And it's going to be, and it's going to be because it's real, and people need to hear it, and it'll help people get comfortable with who they really are, which is the reason why we wanted to bring you on the podcast.
Yeah, I do think.
Don't say you hope so. By the way, okay, you have to manifest.
Oh, definitely, it should be. It should be. I know
both.
that the framework is effective because I've seen it work with so many students already, right? Like I've been now teaching this for 5 years, and it is remarkable to see how learning about the intricacies of these little micro decisions you make at every turn of every conversation, how it really changes people's lives. It's wild. And people come in, just like you said, people come in with different strengths and weaknesses. Some people are funny and some are not. Some are good at asking questions, some aren't. Some are good at focusing on other people. Some are insanely selfish and self-centered. Whatever your strength or weakness is, this framework is helpful.
Okay, so if you've listened to any of my podcasts, we pick 5 words from the book, and then we ask the author to respond in a sentence, a word, something that comes to mind. I'm going to say the word, and you're going to respond. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
So if I say the word asking, you say what?
Delightful.
Okay, give me more context. So you have to ask people things, right?
You got to ask people things. We all need to ask more questions, especially follow-up questions, open-ended questions that start with what rather than why. Why questions can feel accusatory. So what are you doing later today? What are you excited about? What were you thinking about when you had breakfast this morning? These types of questions are delightful and extract a lot of information. Why questions like, why did you have cornflakes for breakfast? Why are you going to pick up your kid later? Why there can feel accusatory. So ask more questions.
All right, it's good. It's a good segue to my next word, topics.
Topics are everything. I think that might be the most novel part of the book, meaning like this is a really new science, the topics piece of the book. We are making topic choices at every moment of every conversation, not just like, oh, what are we going to talk about at the beginning? No, every time you're speaking, you are deciding whether to stay on this topic or switch to something else. And we can all make those choices much more effectively.
Okay, the L for levity. Levity.
It's not about being funny. It's about finding the fun, making it fun for people, because conversation requires mutual engagement. It cannot be boring. So it's not about being funny. It's find the fun. You can do that with humor, but you can also do it with warmth, compliments, switching topics, just focusing on the other person.
What about kindness?
Oh, what's not about kindness? It's something kindness is a word that we all learn to treasure and cherish as children. And then we never really figure out how to do it in practice. I think in the book, we put out a nice, very concrete way to think like a kind person, act like a kind person, talk like a kind person through respectful language, receptiveness to opposing views, which can pop up at any moment in any conversation, even ones that are supposed to be fun, and listening, using your words to show people that you're listening to them. Those are kind things.
TALK, talk.
Yeah. I think the talk is everything. It's every relationship in your life is a sequence of conversations. And if we can do each one of them even a tiny bit better, imagine the accumulated effect that would have on your life, on your relationships, and on your work, on the world. This is what we all need to get better at. And it's going to happen in tiny little increments, tiny micro decisions. The decision to make that joke, that decision to ask that great question, the decision to let people have differing views and not get mad at them.
So the book is awesome, by the way. And I got to tell you something. I am very impressed with you because you are an old soul. You're not talking with 40 years worth of wisdom. There's a lot of insight that you're providing. What are some of the people in your life, before I let you go, that you've read or that you've gotten some insight from? You know, I mean, it could be as old as Dale Carnegie. It could be as new as Robert Greene. Or
yeah, I love people. I'm blessed with so many smart, loving, wonderful people in my life that have been influential, starting with my twin sister and amazing parents, all the way to my colleagues at Harvard. I have a wonderful friend at Harvard named Mike Norton, who's just an absolutely brilliant psychologist. He wrote a book last year called The Ritual Effect. We have this sort of fight club. It's Mike Norton, Todd Rogers, who wrote a book called Writing for Busy Readers, Leslie John, whose book Reveal is coming out next year. And we get together almost like a little fight club of behavioral scientists, and they've really shaped how I see the world and think about humanity. and think about how to do good in the world, how to make a small positive dent in the world. There are so many other unexpected things. So I invite a lot of visitors to my class, including, you mentioned Broadway, but we have some like freestyle rappers come to my class. I've learned a lot from people who do improv. So Kelly Leonard, The Second City, is a good friend. And Anthony Veneziale and Lin-Manuel Miranda, who did this show called Freestyle Love Supreme. They come to my class and teach my students about freestyle rapping. I mean, if you can freestyle rap, you're definitely going to get better at conversation.
It's great stuff.
Yeah.
Listen, I really appreciate you coming on. The title of the book is Talk, The Science of Conversation and the Art of Being Ourselves.
Yeah.
It's by Allison Wood Brooks. Thank you so much for being on Open Book.
Thanks for having me, Mooch. Good luck with those little kids.
Thank you. The next person I interviewed was a woman from Harvard Business School. She wrote a book called Talk, and it was about the conversations that we have with people. Her name was Professor Allison Wood Brooks. So tell me, Ma, what do you do all day? You talk on the phone, right? How is it possible for you to have call waiting and every time I call you, the phone is busy? How is that possible? It's like a switching station, right?
Now I'm 88, so the phone is a very good pastime. But when I was young, I was edgy. I used to drive a motorcycle, and I loved it. And I didn't have a helmet, and I liked the idea of my hair blowing. When I was 6, I used to wait for my brother, who was named the Ghost. And I've been on it since I was 6 years old, and I still love it today. And I used to horseback ride, and I worked in a beauty parlor that was fast. I had to quit because I was edgy enough to do something wrong.
What did you do wrong in the beauty parlor?
I didn't do anything wrong, but I could have done. There was things flying around.
Oh, you mean men were making the move on you?
Yeah, and it was a fast-moving shop. It was very, very fast, and I had to quit because I was edgy.
Okay.
When I was young, not now. I even they used to say that I look like Natalie Wood. What the hell is it? They used to say to me.
All right.
And they used to try to make my hairstyle like that. And I do have pictures where she had that hairstyle.
I'm definitely going to need therapy after these podcast conversations, for sure. But do you think you're a good listener, Ma, or what?
Yes, I do.
Okay, tell me what makes a good listener.
Well, I used to read quite a bit when I don't read so much now, but I used to read quite a bit, and I used to read like about Truman, Van Gogh, Roosevelt. I used to read very interesting books. Now I don't.
Mm-hmm. Why not?
Now I read makeup books.
Oh, you like reading about makeup?
I love reading.
But you didn't answer me though. What makes you a good listener? Are you a good listener or not really?
It depends on the topic.
Okay, so what makes a good listener if it's not you?
If it's not me,
what makes a good listener?
You're a good listener. You're a good listener because you go forward and you absorb things. You don't reflect stuff.
Okay.
And I think that's a good listener.
Okay.
When you can absorb what people are saying of any walks of life, you become a good listener. You don't reflect it.
Hey, thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, here's another one right up here that you might like.
Do not underestimate how ugly the world can get and how fast it can get ugly when the U.S. is not engaged, when it's not providing stability in these key regions of Eurasia. The reason the U.S. has the alliance commitments that it has right now is that the World War II and the post-World War II generation had seen the world totally fall apart twice before in the space of 30 years in the first half of the 20th century. Because without the United States involved, there was no combination of European or Asian powers that could prevent the bad guys from getting up ahead of steam and running roughshod over Western Europe as Hitler did in 1940. We sort of think that sort of thing is impossible today. It's not impossible, it just hasn't happened because the United States and its friends have worked so hard to prevent it from happening since 1945. Our understanding of how nasty the world can get has been affected and has been distorted by the success of the American order. Trump is right that levels of military spending throughout the democratic world have long been been too low. He's right that European countries, I think Germany is the worst offender, have been free riding on the United States while refusing to invest in their own ability to support a collective defense. One of the things that has to be done to preserve this international system that's benefited us and people around the world tremendously is just to bolster the defenses of the democratic world. And that requires higher levels of military spending, yes, in the United States, but also among democratic allies in Europe and East Asia.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us today on Open Book is Hal Brands. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. He's an expert on global affairs, and to be perfectly exact, he's the Henry Kissinger Distinguished Professor at Johns Hopkins University. We'll talk a little bit about Dr. Kissinger in a second, but the title of the book is The Eurasian Century, Hot Wars, Cold Wars, and the Making of the Modern World. It's an incredible book. You should go out and read it if you really want to understand what's going on in the world today. I appreciate you writing the book. But before we get into the book, tell us a little bit about your background. You say you're in the family business. So what do you mean by that, Professor Brands? You're in the family business. Hey, everyone. It's Anthony Scaramucci here with some straight talk. Let me tell you, we've got 85% of our viewers who haven't hit the subscribe button yet. What's up with that? It hurts. Listen, I made my career by going all in. Right now, only 15% of our viewers are part of our subscribed family. So please take action. This helps us book more amazing guests. Hit subscribe, join our community, and let's turn these numbers upside down. Now back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I sort of inherited the historical profession from my dad, who's a history professor in his own right and a pretty prolific author. And so when I was growing up, there were a lot of books about U.S. political, military, diplomatic history on the bookshelf. And I guess that's where I got the bug. I'm a historian by trade as well. And so I've spent the predominant part of my career in academia, but I've always tried to keep a foot in policy debates in D.C. and elsewhere. So I've worked or consulted for government a couple of times and generally tried to figure out what history can tell us about the problems that the U.S. and its friends are confronting today.
Okay, so the book, The Eurasian Century, it's an interesting title because, as you point out in the book, there's been more than one Eurasian century. I guess you could argue that most of world history has happened on that landmass, which we say is two continents, but it's really just one big landmass. And so tell us what we need to know about Eurasia.
So you can think of Eurasia as the strategic center of the world. It's where most of the world's people live. It's where most of the world's economic resources are found. It's where most of the world's military potential is located. And so really throughout history, the fact has been that a country or a group of countries that managed to take over Eurasia or big chunks of it would probably have unbeatable power in a global sense. And the reason the period since around 1900 is what I call the Eurasian century is that's when you had technological revolutions, particularly the proliferation of railroads across Asia in particular, that made it possible to move armies more rapidly and at greater scale across that vast expanse than had ever been the case before. And that was sort of the starter's pistol for a series of epic clashes over Eurasia and its key regions: World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and then we're really in round 4 of that today.
So there was a professor, I think he was an Oxford professor, his name was Mackinder. I know you know who he is, you've referenced him. Steve Bannon is somebody I used to work with. I think Steve Bannon is crazy, by the way. I mean, it's my podcast, so I can say whatever the hell I want. You don't have to answer. You can be the diplomat that you are. But he did say something about Mackinder to me, Harold Mackinder, when we were working together in the Trump administration, about his theories related to Eurasia. So
yeah,
what are his theories related to Eurasia, and how do they coincide or not coincide with your theories?
Mackinder is in some ways the main character in the book. I mean, he's Mr. Eurasia. And so he became prominent in the early 20th century. He gave a lecture that was later published as an article called The Geographical Pivot of History, where he basically laid out a version of the argument that I just made, that Eurasia has long been where the action is, and it was going to become more strategically volatile in the 20th century for two reasons. One was with the completion of the Trans-Siberian Railway across Russia, you go from one side of Eurasia to the other much more rapidly via land. But two, up until the end of the 19th century, the great powers could sort of expand into Africa, Asia, the Middle East with minimal resistance. This was sort of the high period of colonialism, which provided a sort of safety valve, right? If you were Britain and France, you didn't necessarily have to fight each other across the English Channel because you could both pursue your greatness out in the late developing world. But basically, the world had been colonized by 1900. And so at the same time that Eurasia was getting more integrated technologically, it was becoming sort of a more crowded space geopolitically because the great powers were being focused inward on each other. And that was really the core of Mackinder's thesis. He would update it a couple of times over the next 40 years. He lived until the early Cold War, but that was how he made his name.
Yeah, I mean, Kissinger, he was a big student of Mackinder. Nixon was. A lot of the Cold War strategists were worried about a hegemonic power controlling the whole continent, and they liked pitting the Russians against the Chinese. Of course, you and I both know that there's been a border dispute between the Chinese and the Russians over Siberia for the last 300 or so years, maybe 350 years. Yet, the Americans, I feel like the Americans have pushed the Chinese and the Russians closer to each other. Am I missing that, or have the Americans accidentally made them closer?
Well, there are definitely aspects of U.S. policy that the Russians and the Chinese don't like, and that has had the effect of unifying them. I think both of those countries are autocratic great powers that want to carve out spheres of influence in their own region and maybe beyond. Both of them really don't like living in a world that is led by a democratic superpower. And so that creates a degree of glue in that relationship, which appears to be complemented by the fact that Putin and Xi get along and have long conversations deep into the night with each other. Now, the question, I think, is could or should the United States do something differently to prevent these countries from becoming closer? Because they're definitely cooperating more in the military realm, the economic realm, the technological realm. I'm not sure there's a whole lot the U.S. can do in the near term to prevent that. I mean, what it would take to sort of flip one country against the other is basically letting that country have what it wants geopolitically. So a Russian sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, for instance, and even then, I'm not sure if it would work. And the reality is that I think just sort of the structural drivers of these relationships are pretty profound. So I'm afraid that we're going to have to deal with this relationship as a geopolitical fact for the next decade or beyond. Even though I think you're absolutely right that there are these long-running historical tensions between them, and over the very long term, if China comes anywhere near to achieving its global ambitions, it's going to pose a much bigger threat to Russia than the United States ever will.
Okay, so be my strategic advisor. I have a declining population in Russia, high alcoholism, 25% unemployment. Yet I'm launching wars outside of Russia to galvanize the nationalism inside of Russia to keep myself in power. I've got a Chinese Communist Party. Now we're going to talk about Xi for a second. Maybe 90 to 100 million people, controlling 1.4 billion people. There are 7 balkanized provinces that I'm trying to glue together to maintain what the West knows as China, but what you know and I know as 7 balkanized provinces that are culturally different from each other. You've got Tibet sitting there as well, which is another big issue for the communists. And then outside of China, or in their minds inside of China, is Taiwan. And so be the advisor to the president of Russia for a moment and tell me what you would do if you're him, and be the advisor to the Chinese president and tell me what you'd do if you're him.
Well, right now, if I
And
were
I caught the
advi-
grin, by the way. I did catch
Yeah.
the grin. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. If I were advising Putin, I would tell him that this is the time to cut as advantageous a deal as he can in Ukraine, because he can probably get a deal that will allow him, at the very least, to keep what Russian forces have conquered since 2014. And if he plays his cards right, because it looks like the Trump administration is pretty eager to put the Ukraine issue to the side and do sort of a larger strategic reset with Russia, I would tell him to push for sanctions relief. I would tell him to, offer U.S. energy firms the chance to invest in energy exploration projects in the Arctic, and basically do whatever I could to minimize the Ukraine issue and then maximize the degree to which you create frictions in the West by trying to pull the United States away from its European partners. And I think that's kind of what Putin is doing at the moment. If I were advising Xi
But
Jinping,
before you go to Xi, though, I've got a domestic problem. You know it, and I know it. My demography's upside down. The West thinks my country's white, but it's really not that white anymore. There's a lot of demographic changes that are taking place inside of Russia. I can't get the economy started. You guys crippled me with these sanctions, and so to quote McCain, I'm a gas station with a kleptocracy. But tell me how am I going to fix this?
well, that's part of the reason why you got to bring the war in Ukraine to an end, or at least hit pause on it. Because if you have to do another military mobilization, the last time Putin did that, that was when we saw, Russian men between the ages of 20 and 50 hopping the first flight to Delhi or driving across the border to get out of the way. So that's just exacerbating the demographic problem, even before you start talking about the battlefield losses, which are severe, and it's exacerbating all of the economic problems. And so the Russians have transitioned to a war economy, I think, with greater ability than many in the West imagined. But that's not a long-term basis for the Russian economy. And I think there are real questions about how long Putin can hold this thing together. He can probably do it for another year or two, but I don't know that he can do it for another 5 to 10 years. So he's got to find a way of sort of normalizing the economy if he wants to hold the larger sort of Russian political experiment together. And so that's why I think it's a package there.
All right, let's go to Xi.
Yeah. So Xi's big problem is twofold. The first is that the economy is in terrible shape, and there really is not a good prospect for turning it around. And unfortunately, the advice that I would give Xi Jinping for turning the economy around is advice that he will never take. And so the advice I would give is you've got to stop squeezing the economy by exerting ever greater political control on it, right? You've got to allow some degree of spontaneity. That was what allowed the explosive Chinese growth from the late 70s to the late 2000s. And it is the reimposition of almost neo-totalitarian political control that is strangling the economy, in addition to all the other demographic problems and things like that right now. But she's not going to do that. And he's not going to do that because he's made very clear that he thinks China is headed into a very dangerous era. And so his priorities are ideological indoctrination, national security, and very tight political control of everything in China. And so I don't think he's going to be successful in turning the economy around. The other thing I would tell him to do, though, is that he may have an opportunity in the years ahead to try to drive wedges between the U.S. and some of its allies and partners. We're only 6 weeks, less than that, into the Trump administration, so it's hard to predict where all this is going to go. But if what we've seen in the last month between the U.S. and Europe is any indication, there are going to be big fractures that open up in what we might have once called the free world. And at the very least, that's going to make it easier for China to discourage, say, the European Union from enacting tighter technological controls, tighter trade controls on its relations with China. And so I do think there's a little bit of diplomatic opportunity there for Beijing.
Donald Trump. Is he pro-American? What is Donald Trump? He's for America. He's for the West. He's for democracies, or is he what his critics say trying to create a tripolar world where he really wants a sphere of influence and some level of heightened executive power in the United States?
Well, I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think that Trump genuinely thinks that he is making America great again, but the version of American greatness he is pursuing is one that is at odds with a lot of the practices that have actually made America great over the last 80 years. And so what the United States has done since World War II is pursued a pretty broad, high-minded notion of national security where we're going to do well by helping like-minded countries do well. I think Trump rejects that. I think he sees the world in zero-sum terms. The U.S. has stayed a superpower in part because we have so many allies and partners around the world, and we treat them differently than we do our rivals. Again, I don't think Trump sees the world that way. I think he sees, every relationship is transactional, and so he's not inclined to give allies the benefit of the doubt any more than he is to give Putin or Xi the benefit of the doubt. And then finally, I think, while this is easily taken too far, it does benefit the United States to live in a world where democracy is widespread, human rights are widely observed. That's just a more ideologically congenial world to the United States. And Trump, I don't think, places a lot of emphasis on those sorts of classically liberal values, because his view is like the world is a snake pit. And so you just got to do what you got to do to survive and to cut the best deals that you can. And it really doesn't matter whether you're doing it with North Korea or with a democratic ally. And so there is a logic to all of the things that Trump is pursuing. But my concern about Trump has always been that he threatens to sort of tear down some of the best traditions of American statecraft.
Did Russia invade Ukraine?
A couple of times, in fact.
Okay, but like the most recent time, starting 3 years ago, they invaded Ukraine?
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, this is like first grade literature, Professor Brands. In the first grade, my teacher taught me about a book called The Emperor Has No Clothes. And obviously the ending of the book is the young kid said the guy's naked. You have the Secretary of Defense won't say that. You have the National Security Advisor. You have a friend of mine that I really respect. His name is Steve Feinberg. He's the Deputy Defense Secretary of the United States. He's before the Congress, and Tammy Duckworth, who's a U.S. veteran, lost her legs in war, is asking him a straight up question, a yes or no question. Did the Russians invade the Ukraine? And he's not answering it. And so does this worry you as a student of history? Does this worry you as an American citizen? I've read your book, and your book is about values-based diplomacy. Your book is about balancing interests, but also the perilous time that we're living in. You've got 5.7 billion people living under some level of totalitarianism, most of them in Eurasia. And you've got the guardians of this light that Elon Musk has benefited from, and these other people, this liberty and this aspirational story of Western liberalism. And so are you worried at all, or you tell me? Maybe I'm nuts, or maybe I'm nuts.
No, I'm definitely perplexed by this. I think there are a bunch of things going on, and as you noted all the examples of high-ranking U.S. officials who dodge questions about who invaded whom. We're recording this toward the end of a week in which the U.S. voted with Russia against a UN resolution labeling Russia the aggressor in the war, and so it's a pretty remarkable period. So I think
we voted with North Korea, we voted with China, yeah.
So we have some friends. I think there's sort of a diplomatic logic to this. I think there is a view among people in the Trump administration that, labeling Russia the aggressor, condemning its behavior, fine. None of that helps Ukraine on the battlefield. And so if we're trying to move toward a peace deal, let's try to strip the moral outrage out of this and just see what we can accomplish at the negotiating table. I think that's the charitable view of what's happening. The uncharitable view, which I think is also true, is the one that you've talked about, which is that, once Trump says something, everyone in his administration has to say, well, of course that's true. Of course that's the way the world works.
Right.
Of course the world is flat, even when it's a patently ridiculous statement to the effect that Ukraine started the war. There is, there is a line of critique among some in the MAGA movement that even if Ukraine didn't start the war in the sense of like sending its tanks across the border, it was asking for it because it was drawing closer to the West, and that was always going to annoy Russia. Yes, Russia was annoyed by Ukraine's ties to the West, but let's not forget that the reason that Ukraine pivoted so hard to the West after 2014 was that it had been invaded by Russia. And so I think there's a real danger in taking that line of argument too far.
Okay, let's pretend that Donald Trump doesn't exist for a second, and I'm going to give you this broad hypothetical. And you have somebody that is a steward of the last American century, somebody that is a student of George Kennan and Dean Atkinson and George Marshall and Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower, has read John Gaddis's literature about the Cold War and is steeped in knowledge of presidential history and steeped in knowledge of the vision of what America is. There's a conversation that's happened from Washington to Lincoln to Roosevelt to Eisenhower to Reagan. And now you're sitting here in this very complex, different world, and you're offering advice to an American president, he or she, that would like to maintain our alliances and would like to grow liberty around the world and doesn't see it as transactional as Donald Trump. What would your briefing be? What would your recommendations be?
I'd probably start by acknowledging the things that Trump gets right, even though he doesn't exist in this counterfactual. I think, Trump is right that levels of military spending throughout the democratic world have long been too low. He's right that European countries, I think Germany is the worst offender, have been free riding on the United States while refusing to invest in their own ability to support a collective defense. And so one of the things that has to be done to preserve this international system that's benefited us and people around the world tremendously is just to bolster the defenses of the democratic world. And that requires higher levels of military spending, yes, in the United States, but also among democratic allies in Europe and East Asia. That's thing one. Thing two is, I would just say, do not underestimate how ugly the world can get and how fast it can get ugly when the U.S. is not engaged, when it's not providing stability in these key regions of Eurasia. The reason the U.S. has the alliance commitments that it has right now is that the World War II and the post-World War II generation had seen the world totally fall apart twice before in the space of 30 years in the first half of the 20th century. Because without the United States involved, there was no combination of European or Asian powers that could prevent the bad guys from getting up ahead of steam and running roughshod over Western Europe, as Hitler did in 1940. And we sort of think that sort of thing is impossible today. It's not impossible. It just hasn't happened because the United States and its friends have worked so hard to prevent it from happening since 1945. And so our understanding of sort of how nasty the world can get has been affected and has been distorted by the success of the American order. And I think that's a prerequisite. Understanding that that's a prerequisite for good strategy today.
Okay, I mean, it's incredibly well said. Okay, I culled from your book 5 words. Actually, my producer did it, but she does all the work, Hal, and I take all the credit. And I'm going to ask you to respond to these words. I'm going to say them. You can give me a sentence, whatever comes to your mind. Okay, ready? If I say the word China, you say what?
A peaking and incredibly dangerous revisionist power.
And dangerous because they likely will start a war or have a military aggression which helps nationalize their interests, right?
Yeah, they have a combination of growing military capabilities and a declining, in relative terms, economic trajectory
Yeah.
And that has historically been an explosive mix.
I always thought when George Orwell was writing when I was a kid, I thought that these were warnings, these were allegories, Animal Farm and 1984. I didn't realize they were playbooks for authoritarians.
How-to manuals.
Yes, I didn't realize that. Okay, about Russia. Say the word Russia.
The most violent of the revisionist powers, and one that will continue to challenge European security even after the war in Ukraine ends.
Right. Would the Russians invade Poland?
I don't know that they're going to invade Poland as long as NATO remains intact, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility that NATO will not be intact, and they will certainly do more of the just below the threshold sabotage,
and also political manipulation. They would love to have an election in the Ukraine where they hijack it. Okay, three more words. Ready? Iran or Iran. You say Iran, I say Iran.
It is the revisionist power that has been weakened the most over the past 18 months, basically since I started writing the book, because of the good work that Israel has done against Hamas and Hezbollah and against Iran itself. But it's also closer to the nuclear threshold than it's ever been before. And that's the big coming crisis of spring and summer 2025.
Okay. America.
Still indispensable to the global balance of power, still far more powerful and capable than any other country on earth, tied in knots politically, and that is creating a lot of uncertainty about our future course.
But if I were the UK Prime Minister or the French President, I picked up the phone and I called Professor Hal Brands and I said, hey, is this a waning thing, the Trump stuff? Or is the next Democratic president going to act like Trump? You would say what?
The next Democratic president isn't going to act like Trump. I mean, Trump is symptomatic of deeper trends in American politics, but I think Trump is sort of one of a kind in the degree of deliberate antagonism he uses towards U.S. allies, although J.D. Vance is doing a pretty good imitation of that right now. And I also think nobody is going to unremember the Trump era among our allies. But once Trump departs the scene, I actually think there will be more of an open fight for leadership of the Republican Party.
Okay. Last one. Eurasia.
It's where the action happens in international affairs. It is where U.S. engagement is most necessary. And it's also, unfortunately, where we see growing ties between and among all of the bad guys today, not just in Russia and China's case, and what we've talked about, but between Russia and North Korea, Russia and Iran, China and Iran as well. And so it's increasingly become a place where autocratic powers create these networks of relations that aren't quite an alliance, but are something pretty close to it.
Well, you're a gentleman and a scholar for coming on. The title of the book is The Eurasian Century, Hot Wars, Cold Wars, and the Making of the Modern World. And it's a brilliant book, and I appreciate you writing it. I learned a lot from this book, and even more so talking to you. So thank you for joining us on Open Book today.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, here's another one right up here that you might like.